I'm Brittany, this is Lan and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. Today, we get to start Volume 2 of Husky and his white cat Shizun. We read a couple of hours, we read about 40 to 50 pages, we have a little break in the middle. And as far as the previous volume was concerned, at the end of it, everything wrong was communicated. There was a single, all the existing miscommunications got worse, basically. Now we have Moran believing that, oh, Shimei loves me. He broke out of the dream state to save me. He said he loves me, which is just going to wipe out any of those weird anomalies that had to do with, I don't know, Chu Wanning potentially having feelings for him and like that conflicting information to go along with Moran's conflicting emotions. We don't need to pay attention to that now because Shimei is evidently in love with us. And why do we need to question anything when Shimei loves you? But of course, meanwhile, it wasn't Shimei at all. It was not. It was Chu Wanning. It was Chu Wanning who broke out of the dream state, who said the thing, who proved his, But Moran does not know this. Chu Wanning knows this. Do you think Chu Wanning's gonna say anything? No. So we are at a new plateau of everybody thinking incorrect things and having beliefs that are not true. It was a great way to end the volume, and we get to pick that up again today. It's wonderful. It's lovely. Not stressful at all. I'm sure it won't lead to anything bad or anything difficult at all. We're starting. Oh, wow. Literally, like, it just gets, it gets right to it. There's like a title page. Oh my God. By the way, the volume art, stunning. Beautiful. The first one was already gorgeous. This one, even more so. So far, this is the clear favorite. This is stupid gorgeous. All right. Even down to the details of, like, literally the white cat on his robes in the... Stop. We are starting immediately after the title page. Oh my God, it's so adorable. That's, which is somewhat ironic given what everyone's heard about this series. We are on page 46. Does it technically... No, it is technically page 11. But we are on chapter 46 for This Venerable One Awakens. Sure. Why not? Why the fuck not? Okay. I have some anxiety about starting this. I'm just not on the whole expecting bright, sunny, happy, joyful things to be coming from the end of the previous volume, but that's what we're here for. So, when Moran came to, he discovered that he was still inside the holy weapon arsenal. How many times are you gonna let me start with headphones on? How many times? How many times are we gonna do this? Right? When I have headphones on for a thing that involves me not listening to anything at all whatsoever, don't let me do that. Feel free to call me out for that. That's not supposed to be a thing. I listen to stuff while I get ready to do this. And then every now and then I forget to take off the headphones. So I'm sitting there with a muted voice in my own ears, not hearing anything wrong until I already start reading. When Moran came to, he discovered that he was still inside the holy weapon arsenal. It seemed he had been asleep for a long while, but when he opened his eyes, he found that not much time had passed. In fact, everything he had just endured might have passed in the blink of an eye. He didn't know if it was because the spell had been successfully broken, but when he woke, he found he was lying on the ground without a single injury. That savage wound, that blood and gore, they were nothing more than a nightmare. They had left not a trace on his body. Despite himself, Moran was both surprised and delighted. Then he looked over to Shimei. He didn't know when Shimei had lost consciousness, but he was also free from harm. Was it possible that, after Shimei passed the exalted Gochen's trial, Gochen had not only broken the illusion, but had healed the wounds they had received within it? Although when Moran thought about it, it wasn't like Gochen the Exalted wanted to hurt them, just test them. So this made sense. All the same, it didn't feel real to Moran, and he still felt like he'd barely escaped with his life. Among the four of them, he was the first to wake. The next to rise was Shimei. At the sight of Shimei's lashes slowly fluttering open, Moran was overjoyed. "Shimei," he exclaimed eagerly. "We're all right, quite all right. Quick, look at me." Within Shimei's gaze there was, at first, a flash of confusion. Then he gradually became more lucid, and his eyes abruptly widened. "Ran, okay, you..." Before he could finish, Moran wrapped him in a tight embrace. Shimei couldn't help but be taken aback, but he gently patted Moran's shoulder and said hesitantly, "What's with you?" "I'm sorry that I made you suffer so." Shimei was perplexed. "Well, it wasn't really anything. I just had a dream, that's all." "But the pain was real," Moran protested. "What pain?" Shimei asked. Just then, Shui Meng also woke. There was no telling what dreams he'd had, but as he shot up, he yelled, "Insolent ruffian! How dare you feel me up!" At the sight of him rising, Shimei walked over. "Young master." "Huh? You? Why are you here?" Shui Meng apparently thought he was still dreaming. Moran was in a great mood, and consequently his attitude toward Shui Meng was rather soft. He smiled as he gave an account of the events that had just unfolded. Only then did reality dawn on Shui Meng. So it was a dream. And here I thought... In order to hide his awkwardness, Shui Meng cleared his throat. At that moment, he discovered that Chu Wanning, typically the most powerful among them, was still asleep, not yet roused. He was astonished in spite of himself. How come Shizun hasn't woken up? The trio approached to examine Chu Wanning's wounds. Chu Wanning had been injured before the illusion activated, and Gochen the Exalted's trial only healed those injuries suffered within the illusion. Thus his shoulder was still soaked in a great deal of blood, making it a shocking sight. Moran sighed. "Let's wait a bit longer." It took about half an hour before Chu Wanning finally came to. He slowly opened his phoenix eyes, and when he woke, his gaze was empty and cold, as if veiled by the thick blanket of white left by a heavy snow. It was a long time before his eyes moved, and they fell upon Moran. However, like Shui Meng, it seemed that for the time being he hadn't completely freed himself of his dream. Chu Wanning gazed at Moran, then slowly reached out, his voice cracking. "You..." "Shizun," Moran said. Upon hearing Moran call him thus, Chu Wanning's hand paused in midair. A trace of warmth finally seemed to appear on his pale face, and his eyes also suddenly brightened. "Shizun," Shui Meng shoved Moran aside and threw himself at Chu Wanning to clutch his hand. "Are you all right? Are you feeling better? Shizun, it took you so long to wake up. I was going to die from worry." When Chu Wanning saw Shui Meng, he was slightly bemused. Then the thin layer of fog in his eyes gradually faded. Now that he could take a closer look at Moran, he saw that while Moran was looking back at him, he was holding Shimei's hand tightly. He had never let go, not for a second. The sight gave Chu Wanning pause, and as he more fully woke, his expression cooled. Then, like a fish in a dried-up pond, it utterly died. "Shizun, are you all right?" Shimei asked, concerned. "Does your shoulder hurt?" "I'm fine," Chu Wanning replied tranquilly. "It doesn't hurt." With Shui Meng's assistance, he slowly stood. Moran was a little puzzled. Chu Wanning had hurt his shoulder, so why was he stepping so gingerly as he rose, like it was his feet that had been injured? Deep motherfucking breaths. Moran, assuming that Chu Wanning didn't know what had happened in the illusion, once again offered a brief account. When Shimei had first heard the tale, he'd thought that something about it wasn't right. Now that he heard it again, he felt even more perplexed. Unable to hold back, he said, "Aran, you say I was the one who saved you?" "Yeah?" Shimei was quiet for a moment, then said slowly, "But I was dreaming the whole time. I never woke up." Moran was taken aback, but he immediately laughed. "Stop joking around." "I'm not joking," Shimei said. I dreamed about my mom and dad. They were still alive. That dream was so real, I didn't think I could leave them behind. He didn't finish before Chu Wanning said mildly, "That's not so strange. Goen probably wiped your memory of rescuing him. Either way, neither myself nor Shui Meng did it, and since he said it was you who did, then it must be so." Then it must be so. Then it must be so. Then it must be so. Okay, all right. Then it must be so. Somebody write that down. If he said it, then it must be so. Oh God. We found the phrase. Apparently, per volume, there'll be a phrase that I can't get over because it wasn't like he was dumb, and now then it must be so. Shimei fell silent. "Otherwise what? Do you think Goen has a means by which to swap people's souls?" Chu Wanning asked coldly. "Sir, it's page 2. You're going to have to dial down the dramatic irony just a little bit for me if I'm going to make it through this." Chu Wanning hadn't wanted to suffer all that for nothing, and he had originally intended to tell Moran the truth. He'd furthermore hoped that Moran would realize that the person within the illusion hadn't been Shimei, but Chu Wanning, with whom his heart had been switched. However, when Moran confessed his feelings to Shimei at the end, it had become too embarrassing for Chu Wanning to bear. When Chu Wanning woke, he had gazed into Moran's bright black eyes. For a moment, Chu Wanning had thought that perhaps, deep in his heart, Moran did care for him, even if just a little. It was such a modest and unassuming hope, a vulnerable thought that only dared to surface quietly and after a long, long stretch of time. As it turned out, it had all been in his head. The blood Chu Wanning had bled, the injuries he'd suffered, Moran knew nothing of them, and neither was there a need for him to know. Chu Wanning wasn't stupid. Even if Moran didn't say anything, it was easy to see just how much he treasured the gentle and beautiful person beside him. Why would Moran ever turn his gaze toward Chu Wanning, who stood in the corner like a puppet covered in dust? Yet even when he'd heard the words, "I've always liked you," past Moran's lips, Chu Wanning had still felt like he'd conclusively lost, that he had suffered an unmistakably miserable defeat. Well, then it must be so. That was the other thing. I didn't mention that at the beginning. That was the other misconception. Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay. To Moran, that embrace within an illusion had been charity that Shimei bestowed upon him. Moran would never ever know that this embrace had been instead charity that he bestowed upon another pitiful soul. Chu Wanning had never believed that Moran would ever like him in that way, so he had done his best to suppress his own feelings. He never acted on them, never disturbed them, never went near them. Reckless affection and passion, I'm so incensed, it's backing up on me. Reckless affection and passionate, obsessive entanglements, these things only grew in the soil of youth. When Chu Wanning was young, he'd also hoped there might be someone who would stay by his side, with whom he might share wine with beneath the moon. But he'd waited and waited, and still this person had never arrived. Later, as time passed, day by day, his reputation within the cultivation world had climbed higher and higher, and everyone had placed him on a pedestal. While they greatly admired him, they'd kept their distance and called him cold-hearted. Eventually, he'd come to accept the pedestal as well as the cold heart. It was as if he was hiding in a cocoon, and time was continuously spinning silk around him. At first, he had still seen some light from the outside seeping through the walls, but year after year, there was more and more silk, and the cocoon grew thicker and thicker, so much so that he could no longer see the light. Within the cocoon, there was only himself and the darkness. Chu Wanning didn't believe in love, nor in chance encounters, and he certainly didn't want to go chasing after any such thing. If he went to arduously gnaw through the cocoon, getting cut and scraped all over in the process, and come crawling clumsily out, only to find no one waiting for him on the other side, what would he do? Perhaps he did like Moran, but this boy was too young, too far out of reach, and too fiery. Chu Wanning didn't want to get close, lest one day that flame burn him to ashes. Well, you're not entirely wrong there, actually. Of course, the one thing that he accurately places is going to be the most devastating one. It's going to... Cool. Thus, any time he could take a step back, he did. This is like a masterclass in avoidance. It's, I'm avoiding you avoiding me. And if we're both doing that, then who's driving the truck? What force, what person is going to shove these two, opposite ends of the magnets together? Because they're just so committed to not coming together. He didn't know where he had gone wrong. What had he done for even such a small daydream to be drowned by storming, frigid rain? Shizun, look over there, quick! Shui Meng's sudden startled cry brought Chu Wanning's mind back to the present, and his gaze followed the call, only to see that roaring molten metal was again rolling in the crucible. The ancient tree spirit broke through the waters once more, wreathed with flames. However, the tree spirit's eyes were rolled back. It was obviously not in its right mind. In its hands it held that shimmering silver sword, the sacred blade of Goen the Exalted. "Run, quickly!" Chu Wanning barked. There was no need to repeat himself. His disciples dashed toward the exit. The controlled tree spirit raised its head toward the sky and shrieked. The iron chains that hung across his body rattled violently, clinking and clanking. No one had spoken, but all four of them simultaneously heard a voice in their ears. "Stop them. Not a single one shall escape." "Someone's talking in my head," Shui Meng cried out in dismay. "Don't pay him any mind," Chu Wanning said. "It's the heart pluck willow's technique, temptation of the heart. Just focus on escaping." Now that he said it, the rest remembered. The heart pluck willow had warned them while he retained consciousness. The temptation of the heart used the greed and desire in people's hearts as bait to compel them to slaughter one another. Sure enough, the voice in Chu Wanning's ears hissed, "Chu Wanning, aren't you tired? Esteemed Zongshi, Yuhong of the night sky. Such a distinguished individual, yet you're reduced to pining for your own disciple in secret. You have given him much, and he's taken it all for granted. He never had eyes for you. He only likes that gentle and beautiful little Shiga. How pitiful." Chu Wanning's face turned ashen. He furiously ignored the noise in his ears and continued to run for the exit. Come to my side and take up this ancestral sword. Then kill Shimei and no one will stand between you. Come to my side. I can help you achieve your wish for your beloved to love only you. Come to my side. What a reprobate. Get the hell out, Chu Wanning snarled angrily. The disciples were obviously also hearing the various enticements that voice proposed. While their pace slowed, they fought the temptation. The closer they got to the exit, the more the heartpluck willow seemed to thrash in his madness. The hissing howls in their ears became practically gnarled. Think it through. Once you're past that door, you'll never get another chance. The voices within their ears differed, but all shrieked sharply. Chu Wanning, do you truly wish to be alone for the rest of your days? Moe-you. Moe-you. I'm the only person in this world who knows where to find the resurrection pill. Come to me, let me tell you. Shiming-jing. We will get back to that in a second. Shiming-jing. I know the desire that lies in the deepest recesses of your heart. Only I can help you. What? Shuizming. The holy weapon you chose was a counterfeit. There is only one weapon left in Jincheng Lake that was forged by Goen the Exalted. Return and it's yours. Don't you desire a magnificent holy weapon? Don't you wish to be the darling of the heavens? Without a holy weapon, you'll never measure up to the rest. Come to me. Shui-meng. Moran suddenly realized that his cousin, who had been running by his side, had disappeared. He whipped his head around only to see Shui-meng's steps slowing until, eventually, they came to a stop. Shui-meng was looking back to gaze at a silvery blue sacred sword floating up and down in the crucible. Moran's heart lurched. He knew how Shui-meng obsessed over holy weapons. When the kid first realized that the weapon he'd received was a forgery, he must have been crushed. The heartpluck willow really knew how to hit below the belt, tempting him with the ancestral sword. Have you heard anything more asexually coded in your life? Shui-meng, don't believe him. Don't go. Young master, let's go, Shimei chimed in. We're almost at the exit. Looking lost, Shui-meng turned his head back and glanced at them. All the while, the voice echoing in his head grew even more hypnotizing. They're jealous of you. They don't want you to have a holy weapon. Think about Moe-you. He's already won his weapon, so of course he'd rather you have nothing. You two are brothers, but if you fail to be his better, then the position of honored leader of Xisheng Peak will naturally fall to him. Shut up, Shui-meng muttered. In front of him, Moran seemed to be anxiously yelling something, but he couldn't hear anything distinctly. He could only hug his head and cry out repeatedly, You shut your mouth, shut up! Shuizming. No weapons suitable for you remain in the holy weapon arsenal. If you give up the ancestral sword, in the future, you will have no choice but to submit yourself in servitude to Moe-you. When that time comes, he will be your master. You will be obliged to kneel before him, to obey his every command. Just think, if you kill him, none of that will come to pass. Fratricide has recurred time and time again throughout history, and he's only your cousin. Why should you hesitate? Come, allow me to give you the sword. Shui-meng. Young master. Shui-meng suddenly ceased his struggling, and his eyes shot open, his pupils red. Come to my side. You are the darling of the heavens. You are worthy to lead an army of millions. Shui-meng, Chu Wanning shouted sharply. Come here. Only when you've become the leader of Xisheng Peak will the lower cultivation world know peace. Think of those who suffer. Think of the injustices you have all suffered. Shuizming, let me help you. Unwittingly, Shui-meng had already approached the bubbling crucible. The spirit of the heartpluck willow presented him with the ancestral sword of Goen the Exalted. Bloody veins crawled across the whites of its rolled eyes. Very good. Take the sword and go. Stop them. Shui-meng slowly raised his trembling hand and took that silvery blue sacred blade. Kill them. Kill Moe-you. Quickly. Ah! Shui Meng abruptly unsheathed the longsword, the weapon a splendid steel blossom in his hand. Then he swung, striking swiftly with a backhand swing. The handsome visage of the darling of the heavens was brilliantly reflected in the spiritual aura of the ancestral sword. Illuminated by the shine of the blade, his eyes were clearer and brighter than ever before, and not the least bit drunk on bloodlust. This strike was directed not at Moran. Rather, Shui Meng lunged straight for the body of the heartpluck willow and pierced through its abdomen. Instantly, the earth juddered and the ancient willow shook. The spell was broken, and the interior of the holy weapon arsenal began to crack and collapse. Shui Meng panted harshly. He had used everything he had to break free from the enchantment. He glared at the heartpluck willow, his young face filled with youthful innocence and determination. In those shining eyes gleamed both naivety and pride. There was more to the son of the phoenix than mere martial prowess, after all. I'm so proud of my baby. Oh, we have art. We have art of the baby that I'm proud of. If I can hold this book. Oh, look at him. Look at my son. He made his mama so proud. Nope. That was a single page. I wasn't turning 2 pages. That was only 1. It's fine. Don't you bewitch me, and don't even think about harming anyone else. Shui Meng gasped as he finished and swiftly wrenched out the longsword. The astringent stench of blood erupted from the heartpluck willow. As he slumped over in his dying moments, his consciousness returned to his body, and the resentful energy within him was thoroughly dispersed. The heartpluck willow clutched his chest and arduously steadied his drooping body as he lifted his face. He opened, then closed his mouth, and while no voice escaped him, the movement of his lips was easily interpreted. Thank you for stopping me. The heartpluck willow's original body was a spirit of ancient times, equal in power to the ancestral sword. Pitted against each other, both sword and spirit had been damaged irrevocably. The spiritual aura of the ancestral sword in Shui Meng's hand dimmed and wilted. All at once, the form of this millennia-old tree spirit dissipated. In an instant, millions of sparkles scattered into the crucible. They danced and circled overhead like flowing and fluttering fireflies, their golden shimmer bright, until finally they faded one by one, never to be seen again. Bonus points for the alliteration of flowing and fluttering fireflies. Young master, come here quickly, Shimei called. The arsenal is going to collapse. The earth was still shaking. They couldn't stay for long. Shui Meng looked back and gave the holy weapon arsenal a final glance. Then he threw aside the destroyed ancestral sword with a clang and left. Behind him, bricks and shingles cascaded down like a crashing avalanche. End of chapter. Oof. We're on page 23 for chapter 47. We're just called This Venerable One Feels Like Something is Off. Whatever gave you that idea, Moran? You're a sharp one. Chu Wanning was injured, and the 3 disciples were exhausted. So once they reached the corridor outside the arsenal, Chu Wanning ordered them to rest a while. No one spoke for a bit, either standing or sitting as they inspected the injuries on themselves or one another and recovered their strength. That is, except for Shui Meng, who was staring at nothing with his head drooping, seemingly lost in thought. Shui Meng, Moran murmured. Shui Meng paid no heed to anyone else. He only walked stiffly over to stand before Chu Wanning and look up. When he opened his mouth, his voice was like shattered glass. Shizun. When Chu Wanning looked at him, he felt an urge to pet his tousled hair, but in the end he managed to push it down. Heaven forbid we show affection to anybody ever, no matter what the circumstances. Right, Chu Wanning? That's healthy. The holy weapon I picked before, was it fake? Chu Wanning was silent. The rims of Shui Meng's eyes became even redder, and his eyes themselves grew bloodshot. If not for the pride and stubbornness that kept him upright, his ears would likely have fallen on the spot. Does this mean I'll never be able to claim a holy weapon? Chu Wanning closed his eyes with a sigh. The corridor was silent, save for his clear voice. Silly child. A single silly child, said with a helpless sigh, and the last of Shui Meng's rationality crumbled. Unable to endure it any longer, he threw himself into Chu Wanning's arms and, clinging to his waist, began to bawl. Shizun! Shizun! Failing to obtain a holy weapon from Jincheng Lake was tantamount to forfeiting one's potential to rise in the cultivation world. It meant surrendering one's chance to ever stand at the top. Everyone was well aware of this. A mortal's powers were finite, and without a holy weapon, however strong, a person was limited by their body of flesh and blood. The young masters of the sects in the upper cultivation realm more or less all possessed holy weapons that had been passed down to them by their predecessors. Even though these weapons weren't perfectly compatible with their spiritual energies, they were still considerably powerful. Among the sect's young masters, Shui Meng alone had not received a holy weapon from Jincheng Lake, as Shui Jingyong and his brother had started from scratch. And so, when Shui Meng had chosen to wield the ancestral sword against the Heartbreak Willow and thereby destroyed them both, he had essentially chosen to sacrifice his spirited ambitions to rise above everyone else. Chu Wanning didn't ask him anything and didn't say any more. He only held Shui Meng and stroked his hair as the boy cried it out. There we go! Affection! Shui Meng had grown up pampered, never really suffering any injustice. He spent all his days arrogantly strutting about, and ever since he was old enough to remember, he had never once cried. But at this moment, tears streaked down his youthful face, and his every word came out broken like the holy weapon he would never have. Oh! Like the lion-hearted aspirations that he had once thought were a sure thing. All of them lay shattered. Shui Meng. Chu Wanning held his disciples in his arms, consoling him. The waves at the bottom of the lake rippled past Chu Wanning's white cloak and his long, inky hair. Moran? Okay, all right. Moran, listen. I recognize that Chu Wanning is currently comforting Shui Meng, which is something that you have perceived to have never happened to you ever from Chu Wanning. But just let that don't notice. You're the dumb husky. Don't notice this. For my sake, I'm not terribly confident. In that instant, Moran could see aught but for his fine curtain of lashes lowering over the fragments of gentle light beneath them. That's a sentence. Then the waves picked up, ruffling hair and garment, and he could no longer see Chu Wanning's face clearly in the dim light. He could only hear him say, "Don't cry, you're already great." His voice wasn't quite gentle, but when those words came from Chu Wanning's mouth, they were indescribably soft. In the corridor, they had all fallen silent as they each dwelt on their own thoughts. Moran leaned against the ice-cold wall, watching Chu Wanning hold Shui Meng and pat his shoulder, and his own heart felt heavy. On this journey to Jincheng Lake, they'd come all fresh and energized. Now they were leaving, laden with wounds. Shui Meng had been the darling of the heavens for 15 years, well-regarded and high-spirited. In the span of a single day, his future had collapsed upon itself. From here on out, he would have to spend the rest of his lengthy life striving to forget these 15 years of blazing glory. Damn! This is a rough page for Shui Meng. As they escaped from the arsenal, they saw the Heartbreak Willow buckling slowly into the crucible, like an ancient colossus finally exhausted. Like the death of a gentle giant or the demise of the sun itself, the remaining merfolk scattered in fright. The holy weapon arsenal that had stood for millions of years was destroyed in an instant. The celestial tree fell with a deafening rumble and set off a surging tide throughout Jincheng Lake. Faced with the enormous whirlpool that resulted from it, the merfolk assumed their larger original forms as in an attempt to weather the storm. Jincheng Lake was instantly filled with glimmering scales, with little room left for mere mortals. "We can't get out this way," Moran shouted. As he spoke, a thick sea dragon's tail smashed toward him. Moran swiftly moved aside, barely managing to dodge. A black dragon suddenly swooped forward, larger than all the others, its blue-black scales shimmering with a golden sheen. "Wangu!" Moran yelled, startled. Wangu let out a mighty roar, and the mute dragon spoke with a voice low like the chime of a great clock. "Climb on my back. With the destruction of the heartbreak willow, Jincheng Lake is soon to follow. Quickly, I will ferry you away." "Okay, Falcor." Damn. For any non-millennials in the audience, that was a Never-Ending Story reference. They didn't know if Wangu was friend or foe, but having no other options, they could only do as instructed. Wangu carried the four of them and surged through the perilous waves that were filled with thousands of dragons, the waters parting in his wake. "Hold on tight!" This was the ancient dragon's only warning before he lunged out of the lake and soared into the skies. Oh my god, it really is Falcor. The pressure hit his passengers like a ton of bricks, the flow of water like 1,000 galloping horses against their bodies. They couldn't open their eyes, could hardly breathe, as they desperately clung with all their might to the dragon's back in order to not be flung into the lake. By the time they could open their eyes again, they were high above Jincheng Lake and soaring through the clouds at the summit of Dawning Peak. Droplets of water flew off of the dragon's large, mirrored scales, and the spray turned into countless sparkles of light that manifested a rainbow in the sky. Wangu raised his head in a roar as color washed over the land. Oh my god, it's Rainbow Falcor. I'm okay. Ooh. Moran heard Shui Meng's voice from behind him against the fierce gale, full of excitement. He was indeed young, after all, and easily distracted from his worries. "Oh my god, I'm flying on a dragon!" Like, listen, I don't care if you're the emperor of the mortal whoever, alright? When you're flying on the back of a dragon, you're flying on the back of a motherfucking dragon. Wangu circled above Dawning Peak, gradually shrinking in size while descending. He landed on the bank of Jincheng Lake at less than half his original magnitude, so as not to crush the surrounding rocks and vegetation. The dragon stayed quietly in place while they dismounted. When they turned to look toward Jincheng Lake, they saw that the thick frozen surface had melted. Waves churned and scattered fragments of ice. The first light of dawn lent the eastern skies a pure white hue, and sunlight spilled into Jincheng Lake with a brilliant glimmer. "Look at the dragons in the lake," Shimei cried. The dragons twisted and coiled in the waters, rising and falling with the waves, until they gradually stopped moving, at which point they crumbled one after another and turned into so many specks of dust. Black chess pieces floated up from the surface and gathered in midair. "The Zhenlong chess formation," Moran muttered. Everything in the lake, from the sea dragons to the heartbreak willow, had been under the control of the Zhenlong chess formation. All that had transpired below had been a match devised by someone hiding in the shadows. Moran shuddered. Something was off about this reborn era. I was going to say he's cluing in now, but it wasn't like he was dumb. I'm okay. Certain events were occurring earlier than they should have, and for no apparent reason. In his previous life, he was certain that no one had been able to command the Zhenlong chess formation with such mastery at the time when he had been 16. Just who was this fake Gochen? I don't know. I don't know who I'm assuming the big bad of the series. I don't know who that could be. Like, 'cause it depends. Did they reincarnate's the wrong word, but did they get a do-over like Moran? Did more than one person jump back like Moran, and so therefore taking all of the experience with them? which would give them advanced capabilities already at this point in time. You see where I'm going? We have no reason to think that whatsoever. And even then, who would it be? Would it be like evil Shui Meng? Or I guess I've had it, I'm gonna kill you no matter what, Shui Meng? Evil as an antagonist, as in set against Moran. It could be dark version of, well, no, because Chu Wanning was already dead by the time he reincarnated. Although maybe he, could he have, Chu Wanning died before Moran, obviously. Not too far ahead of him, but a little bit. Could Chu Wanning Prime, have been reborn in it? No, because then he'd be hanging around with, damn, they'd all be in their own body. Well, now I'm flat out of theories. I got no idea. Because obviously, if Chu Wanning had woken up in his body, then he'd be walking around with Moran this entire time. Like, no, that's not okay. Or anything like that. Shui Meng, anyone who's been running around so far. That doesn't work. So no, I have no idea. I have no theories at this point in time, but we're very early on. So where in God's name did I stop to theorize? Wangu, Shui Meng cried out. Moran turned, only to see Wangu crouching on the ground, unmoving. While no black chest piece emerged from his body, he appeared extremely weak, his eyes half closed. You can't kill Falcor. You can't do it. You lot did well. It's far preferable to see our exalted god Gochen's Jingcheng Lake destroyed than to see it fall into the hands of a villain. When Wangu finished speaking, his body began to glow with golden light. And when the light subsided, he had assumed human form? It was you? Moran and Shui Meng exclaimed simultaneously. The Wangu before them was the very same elderly, white-haired merman who had led them to the holy weapon arsenal. I was wondering about that guy. Wangu lifted his head, a glint of guilt in his eyes. It was me. Shui Meng was shocked. Why did you lead us to the arsenal? Did you mean us to help or harm? If you mean harm, then why have you brought us ashore? But if you mean to help, if we hadn't passed the Heartbreak Willow's trial, wouldn't we have... Wangu looked down, and his voice was hoarse as he said, Please accept my apologies. Circumstances being what they were, there was naught else I could do. The false Gochen's own cultivation is insufficient, and he relied wholly on the Heartbreak Willow's spiritual power to wield the forbidden technique. That's good, at least. The only way to dispel his magic was to overcome the Heartbreak Willow. I had no choice but to vest my hope in the four of you. Chu Wanning shook his head slightly, then walked over to Wangu and began channeling spiritual energy to heal his injuries. Wangu let out a long sigh. Daozhong is kind, but there is no need. It is my time! What did I just say? You can't kill Falcor. I am no different from the other creatures of the lake. I subsisted on the Heartbreak Willow's spiritual energy. Now that it has fallen, I am not long for this world. Chu Wanning remained silent. Wangu continued, The order of life and death cannot be altered. I have lived to see the nightmare of Jincheng Lake broken, so my wish is fulfilled, but I am full of remorse for having involved you in these perils. It's no matter, Chu Wanning said. After a pause, he asked, Do you know the identity of the pretender and what he wants? Probably not. It's only the start of Volume 2. I do not know his identity, Wangu replied. However, his goal was most likely to obtain the Heartbreak Willow's power in order to command the 3 forbidden techniques. The forbidden techniques require an incredible amount of spiritual energy, Chu Wanning muttered. They would indeed be much easier to master with the help of an ancient tree spirit. Yes, that man said as much. He also said that while ancient spirits are immensely powerful, they are extremely difficult to find. The only one whose location can be traced from the ancient records was the heartbreak willow. The intruder appeared only recently, and after taking control of Jincheng Lake, he spent all his time at the bottom of its depths, using the heartbreak willow's power to practice the forbidden techniques of rebirth and the Zhenlong chess formation. Are we going to have to go hunting for major spiritual dudes, beefy things? Because he's going to be drawn to them like a moth to a flame. To stop this guy? I'm just thinking out loud. Wangu sighed, his eyes somewhat empty and dull. Moran felt his heart drop. Sure enough, this trip to Jincheng Lake had been entirely different from the one in his past life, and everything that had caused the changes had taken place not long ago. Just what was going wrong to make these events change course? He lacked the strength to control living beings, so he killed innumerable creatures in the lake and attempted to control the dead instead. He managed this, and in a mere few weeks' time he had slaughtered practically all who lived in the lake and turned them into chess pieces. He left only a few alive to experiment on, myself included. When you came out of the water to meet me, were you being controlled by the fake Goen? Moran asked. No. Wangu slowly closed his eyes. He may be able to control the others, like the fox spirit or even the heartbreak willow, but he cannot control me. I am a spirit beast who was tamed by Goen the Exalted at the creation of the world millennia ago. When I submitted to being his steed, I was branded with his seal on my inverted scale. There's a footnote about this. In Chinese mythology, dragons possess an inverted scale on their throats. The scale must not be touched, lest the dragon kill the offender. The inverted scale is also used as a metaphor for a sore spot or weakness that can provoke strong negative reactions. I got you. And thus I shall be loyal to one master only in life and death. Then why did you... It was an act. I had no choice. Wangu sighed. The intruder may not have been able to totally control me, but the brand of Goen the Exalted is millions of years old, its effectiveness a mere fraction of its original potency. A portion of my body fell under the fake Goen's influence. The reason I was mute at our first meeting was because the pretender had control of my throat. Only when his magic was dispelled was I able to speak again. Did that Goen know you were pretending? Asked Moran. I doubt it. Wangu looked to Moran. He planned to take your spiritual core today, in order to extend the heartbreak willow's life. He didn't anticipate that I would bring you back to the holy weapon arsenal to destroy the ancient willow, and he took no precautions against my interference. Perhaps it's not that he did not take precautions against you, Chu Wanning suddenly suggested, but rather that he didn't have the strength to spare for any such thing. What does Daozhong mean? There's another odd thing about this pretender. And that's where we're just ending chapters. Out here. That's the vibe for Volume 2. We're just ending chapters on that kind of bullshit. We're on page 33 for chapter 48 called This Venerable One's Old Dragon. Okay. Now that... Oh, wait. Let me double check how long this... How long is this chapter? 10 pages? No. Okay. All right. We're going to do this chapter and then we're going to break real quick for midpoint. Yes. Because, I mean, I got to know, you can't float, you know, like, there's another thing odd about this, and then we go on break, that's mean. So anyway, now that Chu Wanning mentioned it, Moran couldn't help but agree. His Shizun was right. A faint odor had followed the fake Goen. Moran had thought he was imagining it, but if Chu Wanning had also noticed it, then there could be no mistake. The smell of death. So not only was this Goen not the true god himself, he wasn't even a living person. In other words, the one behind this mess had just pulled the strings attached to a corpse dressed as the god of weaponry. The real puppeteer wasn't even here. Hang on. In other words, the one behind this mess had just pulled the strings attached to a corpse dressed as the god of weaponry. The real puppeteer wasn't even here. Of course not. Moran's thoughts were interrupted by a low, sorrowful chuckle from the direction of Jincheng Lake. Immediately after, a deathly pale body shot out from the water like an arrow as the fake Gochen leapt into the air. But both his appearance and behavior had become terrible to behold, his skin wrinkled all over like a snake in the midst of molting. There's a visual. Or a silkworm writhing to break through its cocoon. Yuheng of the night sky, the Beidou immortal. Chu Zongshi, you really do live up to your name. The fake Gochen levitated above the crystalline water of the lake, face twisting into a semblance of a gnarled smirk, even as pieces peeled off. Sorry, too disgusted to pronounce that correctly. How did Rufeng's sect let someone like you slip through their fingers? Chu Wanning's voice was frosty as he asked, just who exactly are you? You don't need to know who I am, said the fake Gochen. I won't let you know who I am either. You can just think of me as someone who should have died long ago, but who crawled out of hell solely to take the lives of you, the righteous and honorable. Think as someone who should have died long ago. Someone who should have died long ago. So, like, not Moran. Not... I mean, I guess long ago is a little subjective. But, like, someone who should have died. Someone who should have died. I'm going to have to keep that in the forefront of my mind. Someone who should have died. Someone who should have... I'm literally writing it down. Someone who should have died long ago. Puppets, dead people. Killing the righteous and honorable after the righteous. Who should have died? Shameless, Wangu rumbled. The heartbreak willow has been destroyed. With your strength alone, without the help of the holy tree, you neither have a way to use the forbidden techniques, nor a means to carry out further transgressions. The fake Gochen sneered. You old eel. On your last breath and still trying to get in my way. What makes you think you have the right to speak here? Get lost. And do you think that you, as a white chess piece, have any right to speak? Chu Wanning interrupted. A white chess piece, as implied by the name, was a special game piece in the Zhenlong chess formation. The individual using the technique could place a portion of their soul into a newly deceased body and fuse the two to form a chess piece as white as pure jade. This white chess piece differed from the common black variety, which merely obeyed commands. In short, a white chess piece was a stand-in for the spellcaster. Though their spiritual power was weaker than that of their original form, they could think and act independently, and the things they saw and heard were conveyed to the person controlling them. So, like, a thrall of sorts. A thrall capable of higher reasoning to a certain extent. Huh. The fake Gochen's identity was exposed, but his only reaction was to laugh and clap. Very good, good. After these three cries, the fake Gochen's face had become even more broken and contorted. It seemed that the spell was nearing its end, and was unable to support the white chess piece for much longer. Thus, the original form of the corpse was emerging. Chu Wanning, don't get too full of yourself now. Do you really think this will stop me? Even if the heartbreak willow was destroyed, my true self can always find other sources of spiritual energy. You, on the other hand... As the false god spoke, his eyes, which grew dimmer and less focused by the second, suddenly swept past Chu Wanning to land on Moran, filled with malicious intent. Moran was struck by a sudden wave of apprehension. If you think that I'm the only one in this world who knows the three forbidden techniques, the fake Gochen said languidly, mockingly, then I'm afraid you won't have much longer to live. What do you mean by that? Chu Wanning demanded sternly, his eyebrows lowered in a frown. My question exactly? However, the fake Gochen ceased to speak. He froze, then exploded into foul-smelling chunks as a jade-white chess piece shot out from his body and whirled into the air, backlit by the rising sun, before it fell into Jingcheng Lake with a plop. It seemed that the puppeteer in the shadows, having lost the assistance of the heartpluck willow, had exhausted his spiritual energy. Simultaneously, Wangu, who had also relied on the heartpluck willow's spiritual energy to survive, staggered and fell to the ground with a thud. Shuemeng let out a startled cry. Wangu! Wangu! Moran also exclaimed. All four of them gathered around the old dragon. Wangu was barely hanging on, his lips colorless. He looked to them and spoke with a voice that faltered like the setting sun. Don't believe that man's nonsense. In his words, there was more falsehood than truth. Great! Fantastic! Wonderful! Shimei's face brimmed with worry and sorrow. Chenbei, please don't speak any further, he said softly. Let me heal you. No, there's no need. If even your master couldn't do it, then you... Wangu coughed roughly several times, then said, panting, After all these years, many came seeking weapons. But when that villain arrived, the heartpluck willow was loath to let him claim the holy weapons left behind by our master, and so destroyed them all. The only ones remaining were a willow vine equal to it in power, and the sword of the exalted god. At the mention of this blade, Shuemeng's expression grew darker, his mouth set in a thin and wordless line. The willow vine went to this young Dajong. Wangu glanced at Moran. That day by the lakeside, I said to you that even if you were evil in the past, I would not stop you, and that I could only hope that you would pursue virtue in the future. I'm going to start that again. That day, by the lakeside, I said to you that even if you were evil in the past, I would not stop you, and that I could only hope that you would pursue virtue in the future. But in actuality, in accordance with my master's wishes, holy weapons should belong only to the virtuous. That's why I hope that you will. Moran understood that it was already difficult for him to speak, and so interrupted. Don't worry, Chenbei. I understand. That's good, Wangu murmured. Then I can rest easy. He gazed skyward, lips trembling slightly. It is said that when one goes to Jincheng Lake seeking a weapon, a creature from the lake will make a request. Most of those requests were to gauge the seeker's moral character, but there were the occasional exceptions. Wangue's voice grew quieter and quieter, tens of thousands of years flitting past his eyes like a carousel lantern. I had an agreement with my master. When he departed, I was to stay and guard Jincheng Lake without leaving. Who could have known that I would be standing guard for millennia upon millennia? The sights I beheld in my youth, the mountains and rivers, I never got to see them again. He turned his head slowly to gaze beseechingly at Moran, his eyes flickering with a warm wetness. In that instant, Moran suddenly knew what he was about to say. Sure enough, Wangu said softly, Young Daojang, the plum blossoms at the waist of the mountain bloom splendidly throughout the year. I was very fond of them when I was young. Even though you have already received your holy weapon, would you still be willing to? Moran was about to say, Yes, I'll go get you a branch. However, before he could even start, the light in Wangue's golden eyes abruptly went out. Jiangnan has little but for a gift of spring in the form of a blossoming branch. That has a footnote. An excerpt from the poems of Fanye by Lu Kai. Jiangnan is a region of China south of the Yangtze River, known for its beautiful spring scenery. They had me fucked up enough to absolutely botch that reading. There's a small scene break on page 37. Snow-tipped peaks towered majestically in the distance, and gleaming gold danced resplendent on the lake surface as the rising sun bathed the waters in its red-hued light. The waves and spray shattered the rays into glimmering crimson. Wangu had passed. He had been among... They keep fucking me up. Why do they keep doing this to me? He had been among the first dragons at the creation of the world, had once been earth-shakingly powerful, and had once bowed in servitude and carried his master to all corners of the land. Everyone had said that the brand compelled his submission, but it had been his respect for Goen that bound him to his millennia-long promise. In this vast land, few remained who remembered the founding of the world. Wangu knew. He knew that although the real Goen the Exalted's veins coursed with demonic blood, his mother had been taken against her will. Goen had abhorred demons, and so stood with Fuxi against their invasion. He had used that very powerful demonic blood of his to forge the first true sword for Fuxi's hand, and had aided him in eradicating the demon race from the mortal realm. But after the unification of heaven and earth, Fuxi had harbored misgivings and resentment toward Goen the Exalted due to that half-demon blood. Goen the Exalted was no fool. 100 years later, he excused himself from the realm of the gods of his own volition and descended to the realm of man. During his journey, he saw endless suffering and slaughter. He concluded that he shouldn't have brought the very notion of sword into existence, and he was filled with remorse. So he gathered many of the weapons he had left in the mortal realm, sealed them in the arsenal in Jincheng Lake, planted the heartbreak willow as guardian, and instructed the creatures of the lake that of those who came seeking, only the virtuous were befitting. Curious, considering that, Big Bad was just like, I'm here for the virtuous people. Now Goen was no more, and Wangu had passed. I can't read anything about Wangu being gone without completely stumbling over it. Have you noticed this? Henceforth, there would be no more holy weapons within Jincheng Lake, and no more merfolk. With the thunderous fall of the heartbreak willow, all of these sins and acts of repentance, the distortion and dedication, had scattered like smoke and ash. For a moment, no one spoke. In the ferocious snowstorm, the scarlet words written on the stone tablet by the side of Jincheng Lake, "The path forward is difficult," were the same as when they had first seen them. Meanwhile, the surface of the lake, now serene, hid all the calamity and suffering that had transpired beneath it. It looked just like it had when they first climbed up Dawning Peak, when they were as yet unaware of the bloody story hidden behind "The path forward is difficult." Moran looked up at the sky. Above the precipice of the peak, a lone eagle soared against the snowdrift. He suddenly thought of how, in his past life, Wangu had given him a powerful long blade. In this life, the blade he'd seen was a mere fake, and the original that had once belonged to him had likely already been destroyed by the heartbreak willow before he could so much as glimpse it. A short while passed, and, unbidden, Moran's mind conjured up old memories. It was the year he had come to Jincheng Lake seeking a weapon. Wangu emerged from the water, studied him with golden eyes that were gentle and friendly, and said, "The plum blossoms at the waist of the mountain are blooming beautifully. Could you go retrieve a branch for me?" Sorry, I hadn't connected that. I hadn't remembered that yet. I hadn't connected those dots yet. I hadn't, Moran closed his eyes and raised an arm to cover them. He didn't know what events had transpired below the lake in his past life. At the time, he had taken Wangu's request for pointless pretentiousness. It took many days before they returned to Sishong Peak. Chu Wanning's shoulder was seriously injured, and the three youths were exhausted, so they rested at Dai City for several days before returning. Shui Meng said nothing of what had happened to Shui Jingyong and Madame Wang. Proud as he was, regardless of whether his parents reacted with disappointment or sympathy, either would be salt in the wound. Chu Wanning noticed this, and his heart ached. So he buried himself in ancient tomes and scrolls all day, searching for some other way of obtaining a holy weapon for Shui Meng, or else some means of allowing a mortal to rival a holy weapon in strength. Apart from this, just who had that fake Gochen been, and where was his true self? And what was the meaning behind the last thing that white chess piece had said before it disintegrated? There were many and more things to worry about, and so the candle in the library of the Red Lotus Pavilion burned all night as the water clock dripped away. Scrolls scrawled with complicated passages littered the floor, and buried in the depths of the files was Chu Wanning's exhausted face. Yuheng, look at the state of your shoulder. Don't be so reckless. Shui Jingyong sat next to him and chattered fussily, holding a warm cup of tea. The Tenlong elder is a master of the healing arts. Make some time and go have him take a look. No need. It's already started to heal. Shui Jingyong clicked his tongue. That won't do. Look at yourself. You've looked terrible ever since you got back. 9 out of 10 people who've seen you say you seem like you're about to pass out. If you ask me, there's something strange about that wound. Might be some kind of poison or whatever. It's better to be careful. Chu Wanning glanced up. I seem like I'm about to pass out. He paused and smiled coldly. Who said that? Shui Jingyong paused for a long moment before eventually saying, Yuheng, can you not always act like you're made of metal and everyone else is made of paper? I know my own limits. Shui Jingyong mumbled something inaudibly. Disconnected. Buffering. Hang on. It had to reconnect. I'm just giving it a second. Because it's back, but it takes a second for it to register for you guys. Let me go back a couple sentences. I know my own limits. Shui Jingyong mumbled something inaudibly. From the movement of his lips, it was very possibly, know your limits, my ass. Luckily, Chu Wanning was too absorbed in his book to see. They chatted for a while longer until Shui Jingyong saw that it was getting late and got up to head back and keep his wifey company. Before leaving, he made sure to fuss some more. Yuheng, don't stay up too late. Meng will die of guilt if he sees you like this. Chu Wanning ignored him with gusto. Having been met with such a frosty reception, Shui Jingyong could only scratch his head awkwardly and leave. Chu Wanning drank some medicine, then returned to the table to continue his research until he started feeling a bit lightheaded. He propped his forehead in one hand, nauseous. The nausea faded in short order, so he chalked it up to being tired and paid it no heed. The night grew late, and finally too woozy to continue, Chu Wanning fell asleep with his brows drawn tightly together and his head pillowed on a sweeping sleeve next to the small mountain of tomes. An unfinished scroll still lay across his knees, while the hem of his robes drooped to the floor like a water wave. That night he dreamt. This dream, unlike most, was clear and distinct, nearly real. Chu Wanning was standing within Loyalty Hall of Xisheng Peak, but this Loyalty Hall was somewhat different from the one he knew. Many furnishings and details had been altered. Before he had a chance to take a closer look, the gates swung open, setting crimson curtains adrift. A person walked in. Shizun. This individual had a handsome face and deep black eyes tinted purple. He was a young man, but when he curled the corners of his lips, he looked almost childlike. Moran. Chu Wanning stood and was about to walk over, but he found that his wrists and ankles were shackled by 4 lengths of metal chains that flowed with spiritual power. They fettered him in place and rendered him unable to move. Shock was followed by overflowing rage. Chu Wanning glared at the chains with disbelief, anger twisting his expression and stoppering his words. It was a good while before he lifted his head to say harshly, Mo Wei Yu, what do you think you're doing? Unbind me at once. But this man acted like he hadn't heard a word of Chu Wanning's furious bellows. A lazy smile and a pair of dimples appeared on his face as he strode over and gripped Chu Wanning by the jaw. What? that's the end of the chapter. We're on page 43 for chapter 49, which is called This Venerable One Shizun is Always So Mad. Is he having a dream about, like, the future? Or the future as it related to Moran's previous life? The OG timeline? What? Listen, between this and that bullshit that they just pulled on me with Wangu, now's a great time for a break. I'll be back in just a couple of minutes with some more tea and maybe a little bit more sanity. And then we will begin chapter 49. For whatever that means. I'll be right back. Alrighty, we are back for chapter 49. This venerable one's Shizun is always so mad. Is he gonna wake up immediately out of this dream? Are we gonna see more? Oh, I kind of don't like it either way. I think we lose either way, because either we get to see more of this dream, or we get to get teased about this. And we know he's had this dream from OG timeline shenanigans, and then we just get to move on. So either way, I don't like it. Chu Wanning's incredulity could no longer be captured in words. His eyes opened wide, and he stared at the Moran in his dream as if he were staring at a ghost. The grown-up Moeyu was gallant, with broad shoulders and long legs, and half a head taller than himself. When he looked down at Chu Wanning, amusement and mockery could both be found in the corners of his eyes. This venerable one's dear Shizun really ought to take a look in the mirror. Moran's finger slid along Chu Wanning's cheek to rest by his ear, his eyes dark and threatening. Great! A moment passed in silence, then he let out a cold humph and abruptly leaned over. This lean was accompanied by a soft, searing hot sensation as he captured Chu Wanning's lips with his own. Caught completely off guard, Chu Wanning's head hummed with white noise. Something in his mind seemed to snap. Moran was kissing him, and Moran's breath invaded him, moist, agitated, full of filthy, sinful desire. Lips met roughly with the scraping of teeth. A stormy wave surged in Chu Wanning's chest. He was nearly shivering with fright, his phoenix eyes wide open and his mind equal parts furious and stupefied. In this dream, it was as if he had lost his spiritual powers. He could hardly even gather his physical strength. Instead, he was held tightly against Moran's chest and couldn't remotely struggle free of his grip. Just to be paranoid, this is where trigger warnings come in. If you haven't looked at trigger warnings and you're like, oh, this might get into trigger warning territory for me, please go check the link in the description, because it will tell you. I don't know, so I just get to be paranoid. For some reason, the Moran in this dream was wholly different from the one Chu Wanning knew. That deferential ingratiation had vanished, replaced by a domineering presence. He could distinctly feel Moran's heated breaths as he exhaled, low and rapid, animalistic desire searing like lava and threatening to melt him down, flesh and bone alike. Chu Wanning's face was pale with anger, nearly about to spit blood. He never could have imagined that he would be held down by Moran without the strength to resist. Even harder to accept was the heat gathering in his abdomen and the weakness in his fingers from the wet, frantic friction of these kisses. He trembled in Moran's embrace. Moran's chest was furiously hot, so hot that it was like Chu Wanning would be burned and drowned, even through the layers of fabric. He wanted desperately to struggle, but he couldn't summon the strength. By the time they parted, Chu Wanning's legs were boneless. Moran, still holding him, turned to press his face against the back of his ear. Chu Wanning felt the caress of warm, damp breaths at the base of his neck as Moran panted. Then he heard Moran say, "Didn't you want to discuss conditions with this venerable one?" His voice was hoarse, so much so that it sounded nearly unfamiliar to Chu Wanning. Chu Wanning looked down only to see the jut of Moran's throat bobbing, a swallowing motion as he fought a losing battle to maintain control. "But you own little of value to this venerable one, so you'll have to bargain with the last remaining thing in your possession." Chu Wanning's voice grew hoarse as well, but he didn't know if it was from anger or desire. Quietly, he asked, "What do you mean?" Moran backed him into a wall, then abruptly raised a hand to strike the hard surface. The other hand closed tightly around Chu Wanning's shackled wrist. Not without malicious spite, but also not without timid desire, he bent down to capture the lobe of an ear between his lips. Chu Wanning shuddered violently, a frightening numbness shooting up his spine and spreading over his scalp. Moran's voice was husky, his breaths heavy and oppressive. "Let me screw you, and I'll let you have what you demand." Chu Wanning's eyes shot wide open, the wetness in his gaze colored with arousal, but even more with disbelief. Moran's hand had already felt its way to Chu Wanning's waist, and his lips moved against the side of his neck. He spoke venomous words in the tenderest tone. "However, this venerable one loathes Shizun so very much, so it'll probably be hard to summon any interest in Shizun's body. You'll have to work a little to make it worth my while." Moran paused before pulling him in even closer, still stroking his waist. "So really, think it over. If you're willing, then get on your knees like a good boy and put your mouth to work. Serve me well, then go spread yourself on the bed and beg me to fuck you." Chu Wanning was about to lose it. For a couple of reasons, I imagine. This doesn't prod Chu Wanning's inherent sense of worthlessness at all. The virtuous, proud, pure, austere Yuheng elder kept his distance from men and women alike and indulged in neither erotic art nor amorous song. I'm falling apart. Ever incorruptibly chaste and aloof, and this fly is not helping. Or, in simpler words, he knew practically nothing of matters of love and lust. Well, that's exactly what you want in this situation. And so, very unfortunately for him, in spite of his anger, all of his defenses fell apart in the face of this intense, unfamiliar feeling. He was utterly defeated. Moran waited for a short while, but received no reaction. He cursed under his breath and started kissing Chu Wanning again, unable to hold back. Mixed messages? "Oh, I'm so not interested in your body. You're really going to have to work to make me interested." But can't hold back from, He pulled back after having, we know that Moran is full of shit in this moment. But that is something directly observable to Chu Wanning. If Chu Wanning had a brain cell at the moment to really observe. But, understandably, he might not be able to. He pulled back after having had his fill of his Shizun's lips, trailing a translucent thread, before biting down none too gently on Chu Wanning's neck, licking and kissing along it to his shoulder, his ear. Chu Wanning's scalp grew even more numb when Moran began to roughly pull and tear at his robes, muttering, "What are you pretending to be so virtuous and saintly for?" as he ripped. When Chu Wanning lifted his eyes to look at him, Moran's gaze was heated, crazed, a strange light in the corner of his eyes, like long-accumulated hatred finally spilling forth. Long-accumulated something. But also, after long years of restraint, the screaming hot lava of desire that had been trapped under layers of rocks was finally overflowing. Thank you. Chu Wanning wanted to look away, as if burned by the intensity of Moran's predatory gaze, but Moran saw through his intentions and gripped his face before he could. "Look at me." Moran's voice was rough and heated, shaking faintly from arousal, or perhaps something else, and filled with the craving of a beast about to devour its prey. I said, "Look at me." Chu Wanning shakily closed his eyes. This dream was far too absurd. There's a small scene break. Shizun. The voice by his ear suddenly became soft and warm, more akin to the tone with which Chu Wanning was familiar. "Shizun, wake up." Which isn't that hilarious, considering that it's... Chu Wanning blearily made out Moran's face hovering mere inches from his own. He instantly reacted with a fierce and well-aimed slap that landed soundly on the boy's cheek, and will do absolutely nothing to dissuade Moran's incorrect impersonation, incorrect interpretation of Chu Wanning being generally cold and indifferent towards Moran. At best. Moran, caught off guard, ate the slap head on. He let out an ah and opened his eyes wide. Shizun, what was that for? Chu Wanning didn't reply as he sat up, his phoenix eyes flickering with anger and alarm. His body was still shaking slightly, dream and reality blending together and driving him mad. Shizun! Stay away, Chu Wanning shouted harshly, brows lowered in a scowl. Moran was startled by this extreme reaction, and a while passed before he asked cautiously, Did you have a nightmare? Nightmare. That's right. It was a dream. It was just a dream. Chu Wanning stared blankly at the person in front of him for quite a while before he was able to slowly collect the pieces of his composure. He was lying in the library at the Red Lotus Pavilion. Loyalty Hall and the grown-up Moran were nowhere to be seen. The only thing in front of him was a face that was as yet young and childlike. Finally fully awake, Chu Wanning paused for a moment to school his expression into one of propriety as he made a show of rearranging his clothes. His slender fingers still shook slightly as he suppressed the agitation and unease that yet remained, and it was only after a pause that he said, I was dreaming and hitting someone. Moran rubbed the redness on his cheek and let out a little hiss of pain. What was Shizun dreaming about? What a forceful hit. Embarrassment flashed across Chu Wanning's features. He pressed his lips together and, turning a bit away, loftily, said nothing. His face was as calm waters, but his heart was full of wildly crashing waves. He could practically feel his own pride on the verge of shattering into a million tiny pieces. He couldn't believe that he would dream of something so unspeakably preposterous, of such filthy words. How absolutely shameless. How could he even call himself a teacher anymore? Even worse, his useless body had reacted to that humiliating dream. He felt like he was about to have a breakdown. Thankfully, his robes were wide and loose-fitting, hiding his shame from the eyes of others. Chu Wanning's face still darkened gloomily as he propped his forehead in one hand. He couldn't grab the dream Moran to vent his anger, but there was an available alternative right in front of his eyes, who had conveniently delivered himself to Chu Wanning's door. So, glowering, he asked sullenly, What are you doing, barging into my private quarters in the middle of the night like you own the Red Lotus Pavilion? Since when were you the Yuhang elder? Moran could not immediately reply. First a slap for no reason, then a thorough tongue-lashing. He felt a little wronged and mumbled in a tiny voice, What's got you mad? What? I'm sorry, I'm just fully... Chu Wanning's never beating the asshole accusations, I swear to God. What's got you so mad this time? Chu Wanning scowled. I'm not mad. I'm going back to sleep. Get out. But Shizun, it's already morning. Chu Wanning paused. I only dared to enter the Red Lotus Pavilion without permission to look for you, because we've been waiting at the platform of sin and virtue for quite a while, but Shizun never came. After a long, long moment of silence, Chu Wanning opened a shuttered window. Sure enough, the sun had already risen a ways into the sky, the birds were singing, and the bugs were buzzing. Chu Wanning's scowl grew even darker. He looked like he might summon Tian Wen and start whipping it about at any second. To think he had actually been immersed in an erotic dream all the way through to early morning. On top of that, if Moran hadn't come looking for him, the dream might have even continued. The thought made the vein at Chu Wanning's temple throb, and where his grip tightened on the window frame, the joints of his fingers turned pale like jade. Chu Wanning practiced mental cultivation, which involved cultivating his mind with restraint and discipline, and made him proficient in suppressing desires. Before this, he'd never even had an unbecoming thought, much less an erotic dream. His principles being what they were, Chu Wanning was like a wooden man, stupid, clumsy, and on top of that, stiff in more ways than... His mental cultivation was so advanced that he had entirely severed himself from all desire, and when he had nothing else to do, he often looked down in contempt on pairs of lovers and dual cultivation partners, feeling quite self-satisfied that he was virtuous and incorruptible, except for those unmistakable feelings he has for his 16-year-old student. could have anticipated that in the end he would fall like this at the hands of his own disciple? The wise, strong, noble, and aloof Chu Zongshe dared not even look at Moran as he furiously spat out, "Hurry and come with me to the platform of sin and virtue for morning practice," before abruptly turning and leaving, vanishing in an instant. Thank you. Chu Wanning is indeed giving demisexual. 100%. Shui Meng and Shimei had been waiting for a long while and were sitting in the shade of a tree chatting when Chu Wanning arrived. Shimei was distraught. Shizun is never tardy. Did something happen? It's so late and he's still nowhere to be seen. Shui Meng was even more distressed. Didn't Moran go looking for Shizun? It's been a while and he's still not back. If I'd known this was going to happen, I would have gone with him. I hope Shizun's not sick. Shizun's shoulder wound was quite severe, even after proper care, said Shimei, and he's prone to falling ill, so that's not unlikely. At this, Shui Meng grew even more restless until he abruptly stood. I can't wait anymore. We can't count on that unreliable mutt Moran. I'm going to go check on Shizun myself. But when he turned around, there was Chu Wanning, pristine robes fluttering as he strode over. I'm just making a note to bring up later. Shizun, the pair beneath the tree called out simultaneously. I got held up by some business, Chu Wanning said. We're doing martial practice today. Let's go. When Chu Wanning wasn't paying attention, Shimei turned to Moran, who was following behind him. Is Shizun all right? He asked in a low voice. What was the holdup? Moran rolled his eyes. He just overslept. Huh? Shh, act like you don't know. Moran rubbed his cheek, still sore from the slap. He definitely didn't want an encore. Shimei blinked. Why's your left cheek so red? If you keep asking, my right cheek's gonna join it, Moran said quietly. Let it be. Let's just hurry and follow. When they arrived at the practice field, Chu Wanning instructed Moran and Shimei to have a practice match first, keeping Shui Meng behind. Sit, said Chu Wanning. Although Shui Meng didn't know the reason for the command, he always treated his Shizun's every word like law. He promptly complied, sitting down on the spot. Chu Wanning sat down across from him. The spiritual mountain competition is in 3 years. What are your plans? Shui Meng looked down, and a moment passed before he said through gritted teeth, to win. If Chu Wanning had asked him this before their trip to Jincheng Lake, Shui Meng would have answered arrogantly and with certainty. Now, all that was left behind this word was a simple, stubborn refusal to give up his pride. It wasn't that he had no self-awareness, but rather that he refused to just step aside and hand his title of Darling of the Heavens to someone else without a fight. Having ground out these words, Shui Meng snuck a glance at Chu Wanning, his heart filled with anxiety. Chu Wanning was looking at him without the slightest bit of any derision or doubt. He only said simply, good. Shui Meng's eyes immediately lit up, and he stumbled over his words in excitement. Shizun, do you think I can still... My disciples don't give up without a fight. Shizun. Outstanding youths from all sects participate in the spiritual mountain competition. Those without holy weapons will naturally be no match for you, but even if your opponent does wield one, there's no need for you to be afraid. A holy weapon isn't the sort of thing one can easily master in a short period of time. Although your blade, Longcheng, is slightly lesser in comparison, it is nevertheless a superb, high-quality weapon of mortal craftsmanship. Can I speak? As long as you diligently train and practice for these next 3 years, winning is certainly not outside the realm of possibility for you. It was well known that Chu Zongshe had a discerning eye and solid judgment in the realm of the martial arts. Furthermore, he wasn't the type of person to tell encouraging white lies out of sympathy. Therefore, Shui Meng's spirits were lifted a great deal by these words. Does Shizun really mean it? Chu Wanning narrowed his eyes. How old are you, Shui Meng? He asked lightly. I don't coddle anyone over the age of 5. Shui Meng, a little embarrassed, rubbed his nose and grinned. Victory and defeat are not something you can control, Chu Wanning continued. What's important is to take pride in yourself. Just do your best and don't worry overmuch about the result. Got it, Shui Meng answered. Having eased Shui Meng's worries, Chu Wanning headed toward the practice field. He approached from the end where the training dummies were located, in order to prevent disciples from accidentally injuring those who passed by while they sparred with the dummies. This area had been built a distance away. One had to walk down a long corridor and turn a corner to reach it. Shimei and Moran were conversing with their backs toward Chu Wanning, not too close and not too far away, just within hearing distance. You two, Chu Wanning was about to call them over, but when he laid eyes on the sight before him, he suddenly stopped talking. Absolutely fuck you. That's the end of the chapter. We're on page 53 for chapter 50, which is called This Venerable One Likes You. I mean, it's got to be referencing Shimei, but like... Let me do a really quick check for chapter length before we get... Oh, this one's... Oh, no. Fairly average, right? 52 to... Yeah. Average chapter. So... As someone who cherished weapons, this kind of scene made Chu Wanning so outraged that he couldn't even speak. He beheld a Moran. Under a flowering tree, not far away, Moran had summoned Jiangui. The size of a holy weapon could be changed at will. Most people like to make their weapon larger and more impressive looking, or at least keep it at its normal size, as Chu Wanning did. Conversely, Moran had made Jiangui tiny, about the length and width of a cord for tying hair, its leaves minuscule. The dignified holy weapon looked absolutely pitiful. Moreover, people had different innate spiritual energies. Thus, Tianwen glowed golden when Chu Wanning poured his spiritual energy into it, but Jiangui, that's wrong, Jiangui, closer? Damn, I need to look that up, took on a scarlet hue. So, leaves aside, at present, Jiangui looked just like a red string of fate. Don't even think about it. Don't even. Just don't. Just don't. Stop. Shimei, tie this to your hand. I want to see if Jiangui has Tianwen's power to coax the truth out of people. Moran smiled. Oh, wait, you want to test it out on me? Moran smiled. Yep, because I'm closest with you, and I know you'd never lie to me. Shimei was still hesitant. That's true, but... I won't ask anything tricky. If you don't believe me, let's pinky swear. As Moran said this, he stuck out his pinky finger. Shimei didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Hey, it's the wrong series, but I still have to drink whenever that comes up. How old are you? Isn't this a little childish? Come on, let's pinky swear. It's fine at 8, then it's fine at 18. And 88 too. Nothing childish about it. Moran grabbed Shimei's right hand and pried his pinky out with a cheeky grin. Shimei, caught between annoyance and laughter at this ludicrous behavior, could only go along. Unexpectedly, instead of hooking their pinkies together, Moran grinned, his eyes smiling as well. Jiangui, time to get to work. Jiangui zoomed faster than lightning, and in a flash it had wound itself around Shimei's pinky, and with its other end around Moran's. The handsome young man laughed like a sly fox that had schemed its way into ascension. Congrats, you fell for it, he said happily, framed with dimples. Shimei really didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He hesitated, then said, let me go, come on. Later, Moran grinned. Just a couple of questions first. Truth be told, Moran had been feeling uneasy ever since that episode at Jincheng Lake, the one when he received the box ever yearning, yet Shimei hadn't been able to open it. Even though Shimei had been wearing gloves at the time and hadn't directly touched the box, Moran just couldn't shake his doubts. What's more, Chu Wanning had ultimately been the one to open it. Chu Wanning, how was that possible? So Moran concluded that the box must have been broken. He wanted to use Jiangui to confirm that, just to make sure. He was absolutely certain in his feelings for Shimei, but he worried that he might not have the same weight in Shimei's heart. As for that confession in Jincheng Lake, he couldn't be sure that he hadn't imagined it. Shimei had a gentle temperament and was nice to everyone. He was totally unlike that Chu Wanning, with his sullen face day in and day out, like everyone else owed him something, thoroughly disagreeable. Taishanjun was a crude person, but when it came to his beloved, he would overthink so much that his thoughts would tie themselves up into knots. If we know anything about you, my man, it is that. First off, Moran's heart was filled with anxiety, but he kept grinning and feigning nonchalance. He decided to toss out a couple of easy, inconsequential questions first, as padding. What do you think of Shui Meng? A prickling sting on his finger, and Shimei fessed up. The young master is a good person, but he's too straightforward, sometimes even intolerably tactless. Moran burst out laughing, clapping in glee. Huh? Even you get fed up with him? Understandable. He's way too annoying. Shimei turned red. Don't be so loud. What if the young master hears? Okay, Moran grinned, but it makes me happy when you badmouth him. Shimei had no response to that. And what do you think of Shizun? Moran continued. Shizun is a good person, too. It's just that his temper is a little... Shimei seemed like he really didn't want to critique Chu Wanning. However, he was bound by Zhengui, so even though he bit his lip for a while, he still ended up having to say, his temper is a little short. Oh my god, can't pull pages apart to save my life. Jesus. Okay. Here. There we go. A little short? More like ridiculously short. He gets mad every other day and won't even admit to it. He's a bigger handful than the Empress herself. Over in the corner, Chu Wanning stood silent, listening wordlessly. If you understand Shizun's bad temper, why did you still choose to study under him? Moran wondered aloud. Shizun is cold on the outside, but on the inside he's actually kind, said Shimei. I'm not as naturally gifted as others, but he never minds if I'm slow on the uptake. He said everyone deserves to learn, and since I'm no good at combat, he taught me healing instead. He's truly very nice to me. Moran, originally quite gleeful, grew quiet upon hearing this, the grin disappearing from his face. A while passed before he said, When has he ever been nice to you? All he did was teach you some techniques and maybe occasionally take care of you. That's only to be expected from any master. That's different. Moran grew annoyed, cheeks puffing out. Anyway, he's not really good to you. Whatever he does for you, I can do too. Shimei stopped talking. In the awkward silence that followed, Moran slowly quelled the flames in his heart. The sight of Shimei looking wordlessly downward filled him with guilt, and he quietly whispered, Sorry. It's all right. A short moment later, Shimei suddenly said, Once, some years ago, before you came to Xisheng Peak, I was walking along a path when it suddenly started storming. At the time, I wasn't yet a disciple under Shizun. I bumped into him while running through the rain. He was holding a red oil paper umbrella, and upon seeing my pitiful state, he offered to share it with me. I had heard of his cold reputation, so I was terribly nervous walking by his side. And then... Shimei's expression was soft. Then we didn't speak a single word the whole way. Moran nodded. He's such a stuffy person. What can anyone even say to him? Yes. Shimei's smile was small. Shizun doesn't talk much. But when he walked me to the door and I turned to thank him, I saw that his right shoulder was absolutely drenched. I had been walking to his left, and I hadn't been rained on at all. Moran fell silent. It was a small umbrella, really only big enough for a single person, and he had used most of it to cover me. I watched him walk away in the rain, and then as soon as I got back to my room, I wrote a letter of intent asking him to accept me as a disciple. That's enough, Moran suddenly said. You're way too soft-hearted. If you keep on like this, I'll feel bad for you. Aran, isn't Shizun the one you should feel bad for? Shimei asked softly. He only has a small umbrella because he's always alone. No one wants to talk with him. That's why even if Shizun is a little strict with me at times, or scolds me a little, I'm freaking out, or scolds me a little much at others, I don't mind, because I remember he drenched his shoulder. Moran said nothing, the tip of his nose a little red, his heart a little forlorn. It was a hazy sort of melancholy, and he wasn't even sure for whom he felt it. Aran, let me ask you something. Go ahead. Do you dislike Shizun? Moran paused. Or in other words, you don't like him, do you? For some reason, when Shimei asked this, his usually gentle and serene gaze seemed somewhat sharp. Moran, caught off guard, found himself suddenly speechless. In his daze, Moran neither nodded nor shook his head. A long while passed before he forced a smile onto his face. Aren't I supposed to be the one asking questions here? I can't just let you turn it around on me like that. Shimei didn't miss the fact that Moran had dodged answering, but he didn't force the issue, only smiling. I was just wondering. Don't take it to heart. Moran calmed his emotions and looked up through his lashes at Shimei's face, which was no less beautiful than the bright moon in the sky. For his third question, Moran had planned to ask Shimei if he liked him. But this exchange had left his heart heavy. He was quiet for a bit, lips pressed together, before he abruptly said, He's just my Shizun, nothing more. Whether I like him or not is irrelevant. When Chu Wanning heard these words from where he stood in the shadows, his eyelashes quivered slightly, like the wings of an injured butterfly. Even though deep in his heart he'd already known, hearing it confirmed made his body feel so light that it could have floated away, while his heart was so heavy that it could have sunk into the sea. He also felt a chill. Perhaps autumn had come early this year. Moran and Shimei were still talking in the distance. Chu Wanning closed his eyes, the mild nausea that had lately come and gone once again washing over him. Suddenly exhausted, he turned to leave. He had only taken a few steps when the autumn wind carried Moran's voice faintly toward him. Despite himself, he stopped walking. Moran was asking Shimei his third question. Well, you've given me your thoughts on Shuemeng and Shizun. Do me next. He tried to play it casual, but he was very careful, almost pathetic, when he asked, Shimei, what do you think about me? Shimei was quiet. Zhengui indeed seemed to possess the same interrogation ability as Tianwen. Shimei refused to answer. So Zhengui's scarlet radiance grew brighter where it was wound tightly around his finger. He frowned a little. Ow. Just say something. Moran's heart ached for Shimei, but this question had burrowed so deeply into his heart, in this life and the last, that it had practically become his personal demon, so he persisted. What do you think of me? Shimei shook his head and closed his eyes, as if in a great deal of pain. His long lashes trembled and sweat gathered on his forehead. Wordless, Moran sighed, unable to bear hurting him like this. Forget it. He was about to remove Zhengui when Shimei reached the limit of his endurance and, face pale, said hoarsely, I think you're great. Moran's eyes widened. Shimei's face went from pale to red very quickly, as if vexed. He turned his eyes down, lashes lowered, and dared not look at Moran. Zhengui vanished into specks of glimmering red light which fluttered like the petals of ravaged flowers back into Moran's palm. With his head lowered, Moran let out a quiet, helpless chuckle, and when he looked back up at Shimei, his face was warm like the first bloom of spring. There was a lazy smile in his voice, but his eyes were a little wet as he said, I'm glad. Thank you. I think you're really great, too. I already said it to you at Jincheng Lake, but since you don't remember any of it, I want to say it again. I'm really very fond of you. He didn't specify what kind of fond he meant, But Shimei still blushed all the way to his neck and couldn't find any words. Moran stared at him with deep, inky eyes that shone with a clear, bright light, like an ocean filled with stars, like gentle waves in the night sky. I want to treat you right. I want to make you happy. Shimei wasn't dense, and Moran's meaning was written plainly all over his expression. Shimei could only lower his head. Moran's heart quivered, and he raised his hand to stroke I'm dying. Stroke Shimei's hair. Before he could get close, there was a sudden flash of sharp golden light, and a lash of vine struck Moran right on the face with an audible crack. Ha! Stung, Moran turned around in shock. Chu Wanning stood in front of the white walls with their green eaves, pristine robes paler than snow, and one hand held behind his back as he stared coldly at them. Tianwen coiled on the ground like a hissing snake, willow leaves rustling, golden light coursing along its length with the occasional spark. Shizun, Shimei said, startled. Shizun, Moran said, holding his face. So what if Chu Wanning was loathed? So what if he wasn't liked? Another person might weep miserably, but would Chu Wanning cry? Ridiculous. Instead, he would, of course, deliver a beatdown. Chu Wanning's expression was frosty. He walked over slowly, voice frozen over, slacking off from training to chat. Mo Yu, you think you're so impressive just because you claimed the last holy weapon. You think you're all-powerful now? Invincible? Aren't you just so relaxed and carefree? Shizun, Chu Wanning glared. Moran, shut up. Shimingjing, spar with me. Mo Yu. Chu Wanning paused, then said resentfully, go practice. If you can't hold out for at least 10 moves against me later, then you'll go back and copy the book of meditation techniques 300 times as punishment. Now get lost. 10 moves? Moran felt like he might as well just go get started with the copying. That's the end of the That's the end of the chapter. And we're at 5 o'clock, so I have to go. Well, this is one of your more complicated love triangles, I feel. Chu Wanning has a habit of acting out of brokenheartedness that he should probably kick. You know what I mean? Should probably heal past that. But we're not even at the healing stage yet. We are so far away from that. That just changes things. Like, okay, so Chu Wanning is in love with Moran. Moran is also in love with Chu Wanning, but is in deep denial about that for reasons that hopefully become clear. You can kind of guess at a couple of them, but still, for reasons that will become clear. So you have this side of the triangle is in love with each other. Just deep denial. Not acknowledging. And then you have Moran, who's in love with Shimei. And you have Shimei, who's in love with Chu Wanning. What could possibly go wrong? I don't see how this could end in bloodshed and tears and unimaginable, horrific consequences. I don't know what you mean. I'm just gonna sit here for a second. It's been raining a lot. There's a hurricane off the coast. We're like 4 hours in from the coast, but we get rain, so I'm just enjoying the rain there for a second. I mean, Rumi, uh, they didn't necessarily come out and say that Shimei is in love with Chu Wanning. But in the subtext of the whole rain on the shoulder thing, I will eat my foot if that's not what you were supposed to glean from that. At the very least, you're supposed to start thinking that. Like, this we're supposed to be like, oh, okay, it's a possibility that Shimei is in love with Chu Wanning. The idea has been planted. True, we have not gotten like 100% confirmation yet, but that is a very good explanation as to why Shimei has been like hesitant towards Moran. There's been a certain, like, it's hard to describe, but there's been a certain wall there whenever Moran gets particularly, like, affectionate, that Shimei being in love with Chu Wanning would very directly explain. Ooh. So, now that that's most likely a thing, I'm gonna go. We were on, hang on, sorry. We were on page 63 for chapter 51, which was called, it's called This Venerable One's Shazun, and then it just breaks down into laughter. So, what the hell is today? Thursday? That was a very interesting 50 pages. That had a lot. That has rearranged my brain into a couple of different directions, and we get to keep reading it next week. Same schedule as usual. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 3 p.m. We will be here, and we will be screaming. So I hope you can make it, but as always, if you don't, these videos are posted immediately after the stream ends. So even if you miss it, you don't really miss it. You know what I mean? I hope you've been having a good week. I hope you have a great Friday. I hope you have a great weekend. And I will see you next time on Tuesday to keep reading Volume 2 of Husky and His White Cat Shazun. We'll find out more then. And in the meantime, please remember to take care of yourselves. And I will see you next week.